Hey, good morning. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Jim Dewar, preaching guy with the Astoria Christian Church, and today we are up in the sitting area, the upper level of my house, and our beautiful new house, and looking out over Young's River, Young's Bay, where it meets the Columbia River. It's just a beautiful, beautiful sight, and it's a place of rest, which is appropriate because today we're going to talk about rest. Back in the late 1950s, the U.S. Senate held hearings on the automation and technological changes taking place in the United States of America. And because of all the labor-saving devices that were coming out at that time, they actually predicted that it was conceivable in the very near future we would have a 35-hour work week instead of the 40-hour work week. And I want to ask you a question. What are you doing with all your spare time? I think it's safe to say Americans are busier now than they've ever been before. The National Sleep Foundation came out with a study that said 72% of us are sleep deprived or exhausted all the time. Did you know that God actually foresaw this and provided a solution to your exhaustion problem a long time ago, all the way back in the book of Genesis? In Genesis chapter 2, beginning at verse 1, we read, "So the creation of the heavens and the earth and everything in them was completed. On the seventh day, God had finished his work of creation, so he rested from all his work, and God blessed the seventh day and declared it holy, because it was the day when he rested from all his work of creation." Now here's the question. Was God physically tired? He needed to take a nap, take a whole day off? No. God never gets tired. He can't get tired by definition. He's always active, always alert, always awake. What he was doing, though, was setting for us a pattern. Within creation itself, there is this rhythm of work and rest. The sun comes up, the sun goes down. Animals hunt, procreate, and then for several months, they go into hibernation. Trees put out leaves and they grow, and then the fall comes and they drop their leaves and they go into hibernation, dormancy. Same with plants. They bud, they sprout, and then come the fall, they go dormant. There's this work-rest rhythm built into creation itself that we humans would do well to pay attention to. Dan Raymond is a preacher in Missouri, and he's got some good observations regarding the Sabbath. I've drawn a lot from his message. Appreciate his work, his insights. A lot of what I'm saying this morning comes from Dan. Some of it is my own addition as well. But Dan points out that this whole Sabbath concept is found in several different places in the scripture. It's found in creation, as we just saw. It's found in the law that God gave to the Jewish people. God told the Jewish people that every 7 days they were to have a Sabbath to him. This was a time of spiritual and physical renewal. In the Ten Commandments, it's commandment number 4. It's the longest commandment, and it may very well be the commandment that is the most ignored by those of us who claim to follow God. But the Sabbath wasn't just once a week. Every 7 years there was a Sabbath where the land would lie fallow. They weren't allowed to plant it. They had to give the land itself a break, and God would provide for them during that year when the land was not producing, which kind of goes into trust, which is what we're going to touch on at the very end of the message. But science, modern science, certainly supports the idea that land, that yields are better when agricultural lands are allowed to rest for a period of time. I know up in Prince Edward Island, they have a lot of potato fields where I lived for several years, and they would rotate the fields, and every couple of years they would just lie fallow, just let it regenerate. All sorts of nutrients come to the surface. It's just scientifically proven to be very beneficial to the land. So there's every 7 years, you've got the land lying fallow. Every 50 years, the Jewish people had what was called the year of Jubilee. This was an economic Sabbath where if you owed debts, guess what? They were canceled. So you wanted to buy your house in year 48 because then you only had 2 years and you can get it canceled. Not so good for the bankers there. But it was the idea that everyone got a break, a reset every 50 years. If you had sold land, it went back to the family, so it would stay in the tribes and stay in the families. If you had to sell yourself into slavery at some point because you were so poor or you were so in debt, every 50 years, that was canceled and you got your freedom as a Jewish person under the law. It was pretty cool. So Sabbath wasn't just a day a week. It was every 7 years. It was every 50 years. This idea of Sabbath rest is all throughout the scriptures. Now, what happened is religion ruined it for us. I love this insight from Dan Raymond that religion usually contains not just the Christian religion, but a lot of religions have some good stuff, but they tend to take tools and turn them into weapons. And that's what happened here with the whole Sabbath concept. So the Jewish rabbis came up with all sorts of regulations for the Sabbath, and they took what God had intended as a gift for mankind, and they turned it into a straitjacket, into something very legalistic, enslaving almost. For example, and we talked a couple of weeks ago about some of the Sabbath regulations in another one of our Core 52 messages. On the Sabbath, you couldn't tie a knot, you couldn't loosen a knot, you couldn't write more than one letter, the Hebrew letter. You couldn't sew more than one stitch. That was considered work. You weren't allowed to help anybody with pain relief. You could save their life, but beyond that, you couldn't assist them medically in any way. You had to wait till the Sabbath was over. They had 39 categories of work, and then every category had a whole bunch of subcategories. So it was worse than going to the MVA or trying to figure out the federal regulations. If you've ever done any contracting work, you can just pull your hair out. What is acceptable and what is not acceptable? And that's what the rabbis had come up with regarding this whole Sabbath business. The Dead Sea Scrolls, which were discovered back in the 1940s, and they go back to the time of Jesus and the first century, they had some Sabbath rules. You were not allowed to carry a child on the Sabbath. You weren't allowed to help an animal give birth. You weren't allowed to pull an animal out of a pit on the Sabbath day, which of course came into play in the Gospels and the story of Jesus when he was here. I like what one of my preacher friends up here at the Warrenton Christian Church, we had a meeting just this past week, and Tony Colomb was talking about how the Jewish people had gone into exile for 70 years in Babylon because they hadn't kept the law, partly because they really hadn't even kept the Sabbath law. And so the religious leaders, as they were in exile, came up with a lot of these regulations to make sure that when they got back to the promised land, to Canaan, to Israel, to their old stomping grounds, when they got back there, they wanted to make sure that they kept the law perfectly. And so they came up with layers and layers of laws to protect the law. So you couldn't even get close to disobeying the law because they had so many other rules and regulations around it. It's like the pendulum swung from we're not going to obey God's law at all to now we're going to obey it to the point where it's strangling us. And that's what happened when Jesus shows up in the Gospels. Here's Jesus in Mark chapter 2, beginning at verse 23, the New Century Version of the Scriptures. One Sabbath day, as Jesus was walking through some fields of grain, his followers began to pick some grain to eat. The Pharisees said to Jesus, "Why are your followers doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath day?" Jesus answered, "Have you never read what David did when he and those with him were hungry and needed food? During the time of Abiathar the high priest, David went into God's house, which would have been the tabernacle, and ate the holy bread, which is lawful only for priests to eat. And David also gave some of the bread to those who were with him, and then said to the Pharisees, the Sabbath day was made to help people. They were not made to be ruled by the Sabbath day. And so then he concludes, the Son of Man, which is one of his favorite titles for himself, the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath day. So this whole Sabbath controversy, Jesus hit head on several times in his ministry. And then he says, the Son of Man is greater than the Sabbath. Them's are fighting words to the rabbis because Jesus is claiming to be the Sabbath giver, the lawgiver. He's claiming deity here, and they knew it. So Jesus sets them straight. He lets them know people weren't made for the Sabbath. The Sabbath was made for human beings. The Sabbath is a gift from God to us. It's not something that we have to be enslaved to. Now today, for most of us who call ourselves followers of Jesus, keeping the Sabbath is no longer a religious law that we feel is something that we are bound to follow or obey. There are some exceptions. I mentioned in a message a couple of weeks ago, a good friend of mine who's a Seventh-day Adventist. My sister's Seventh-day Adventist. So there are groups that hold to keeping the Sabbath as something that God is very, very, very deeply concerned about. And if you don't do it, you are in deep weeds with God, as I was informed by my good friend that he thinks I'm somewhat in jeopardy because I don't practice the Sabbath. There are some reasons why we don't believe that the Sabbath is something we are bound today. Jesus said in Matthew 5:17 in the Sermon on the Mount, I have come to fulfill the law, not abolish it. And so we believe that it was fulfilled in him. All the requirements that we have to keep the law, we can't do it. That's why Jesus came and took our place. Romans chapter 6, verse 14, the Apostle Paul says that we are no longer under law, but we are under grace. Romans chapter 7, verse 4, he says we died to law. The whole book of Galatians, many other writings in the New Testament, we are not bound by law. If we're bound by the Sabbath, well, then we're bound by all the other laws as well. And that would completely undo what Jesus came to accomplish, which was satisfy the demands of the law. In fact, I think that Jesus himself was a type. Remember early on in our Core 52 series, we talked about types that are shadows or foreshadowing that we see in the Old Testament that point towards Jesus fulfilling them in the New Testament. I think the Sabbath was one of those. We're going to talk more about that in just a moment. Now, for many of us, Sunday is considered the Christian Sabbath. You might remember the 1981 movie Chariots of Fire. Olympic runner Eric Liddell is very religious, very devout. He's the son of missionary parents. And in the 1924 Olympics, he discovers that he is scheduled to run a race on Sunday, and he refuses to do that because it would be breaking the Sabbath. The whole movie is built around that. He runs a race that he hasn't trained for, and he wins that. But that kind of brought to the forefront 40 years ago this whole Sabbath issue. My first experience with it was I was attending a church in Pennsylvania as a teenager. I don't know, 13, 14, 15 years old, and a tree had come down in a storm, a big branch on our pastor's front lawn, and I told him I would love to take care of it with a chainsaw. And I showed up after church one Sunday, and his family's in there eating their Sunday lunch, and they hear the vroom, vroom, vroom of my chainsaw, and he ran out and made me stop. Said, no. We don't do any work on the Sabbath. And I'm like, but it's the only day I got to take care of this tree because tomorrow I go to school, and I worked after school, and that was my introduction to the Sabbath. My wife grew up in a preacher's family, and she was just telling me not too long ago, Sunday, that you couldn't do anything. Sunday was for church in the morning, and it was for church in the afternoon, and otherwise there was no entertainment. There was just not a whole lot of anything. And some of you have probably grown up and had similar experiences like that. Many states still have blue laws. It's interesting, the blue law term comes from what was reportedly the color of the paper that the Puritans used back in the 1700s as they founded their religious communities in the New World, and they forbade people to do all sorts of things on Sundays, and many states have blue laws. A lot of them have been repealed the past several decades. Some states still have restrictions. For example, when we lived in Texas, you couldn't buy a car on Sunday, which kind of bothered me because I drove a school bus in the morning and the afternoon. I had no time to go and check out a used car. And if you didn't get that done on Saturday, it didn't get done. A lot of states, their blue laws, even today, you can't buy alcohol on Sunday, or you've got to buy it afternoon or something like that. Now, it may surprise you that there is no command to keep the Sabbath in the New Testament. There's no command in the New Testament that we are to worship on Sunday or any other day of the week. Maybe you've heard it said that you can only take communion on the Lord's Day. I was at a church one time years ago, as I was still a youth minister in Baltimore, Maryland, and we had a Thursday evening, Maundy Thursday service, and a group of guys came up from a very conservative church in Maryland, only to walk out because we were going to have communion at the end of that service, and their point was you can only take the Lord's Supper on Sundays. It was horrible. It was legalistic. It was ugly. It was mean-spirited. It had nothing of the spirit of Jesus at all, but it made them feel really self-righteous, kind of what Jesus was up against in the New Testament. They were very Pharisaical as far as I was concerned. Paul said this in 1 Corinthians 11:25, talking about the Lord's Supper. In the same way, he took the cup after supper, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me. For as often as you eat this bread and drink the cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes." So Paul says, Jesus said, as often as you do it, whenever you take the Lord's Supper, whenever you remember what he did for you, just do it in remembrance of him. He didn't specify a particular day. In Acts chapter 15, the early church is in crisis. Do you have to become a Jew in order to become a follower of Jesus? And they had this huge council meeting, the Jerusalem Council, in Acts chapter 15. And the conclusion of that is, no, you don't have to become a Jew. You don't have to obey all the Old Testament laws. And they come up with just 4 very simple ones that they recommended that they pay attention to so that they would not offend Jewish sensibilities in the communities where there were Jewish people and coexisting with the Gentiles or the non-Jews who were coming into the church. Don't eat meat that was sacrificed to an idol, because that would offend a Jew. Don't drink blood. Don't eat meat that's been strangled, and abstain from sexual immorality, which is a good principle to go by anyway. And that was it. And then the apostles say, if you do these things, it will be well for you. They didn't even put it on the level of a command. And to me, that's an argument from silence, because if the Sabbath is so important, if God is really up there ticked off because I'm not observing a Sabbath, whether it's Saturday or Sunday or whatever day, why didn't it show up right there when the apostles were dealing with this very question? What is the Christian's relationship to the law? It's not there. And so you have freedom to worship however you want. One of our churches up here in the Clatsop County, Oregon area is right down the road, about 20 minutes, the Napa Christian Church. They meet their worship, quote, quote, worship, and I'll explain that in just a minute. They worship on Saturday, like 5:30. For one, it's because they have 2 or 3 other churches in this very small town, so why all compete for the same 10 or 11 o'clock hour? For another, it's a different style of worship. After they have their worship service, they always have a fellowship meal. And is God up there angry at them because they're not meeting on Sunday morning or Saturday morning or any morning in particular? Or is he pleased, hey, my people are getting together, they're reading my word, they're studying my word, they're singing my praises, they're remembering what I did for them, they're bringing their offerings, they're encouraging one another, they're doing church life? I think that's what God's more concerned about. In John chapter 4, Jesus has this incredible conversation with a woman in Samaria, the woman at the well. And he tells her the time is coming when those who worship God will worship in spirit and in truth, because she was concerned, do you worship the temple? Do you worship this mountain, that mountain? What physical location does God want us to worship at? She's trying to engage him in a religious argument. He won't take her. He won't take the bait. The time is coming when we worship God in spirit and in truth. The location is irrelevant. The time, the day, irrelevant. This is the point Paul would make in Romans chapter 12, beginning at verse 1. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. So, for the Apostle Paul, which is amazing when you consider that he was once a diehard Pharisee, a Sabbath keeper, to say, worship is your body. It's what you present to God in your life. It's not limited to 1 day a week or 1 hour a week. It's your life, it's your body, it's your mind. It's learning to have the mind of God. Remember my mantra, the only thing God's ever wanted, Old Testament and New Testament, is a people who reflect his character, become more and more like God. That's your worship. It's not 1 day, it's not 1 time, it's not 1 place. In Matthew chapter 11, verse 28, Jesus said, come to me all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Rest? Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Jesus says, come to me and I will give you rest. The very next verse, chapter 12, they attack him for failing to keep the Sabbath. Is that by coincidence that Matthew put those 2 stories together? Jesus says, I will give you rest. And then the Pharisees attack him for the Sabbath. I don't think so. I think Jesus is making it clear. I am your rest. When you come to me, you don't have to worry about keeping the law anymore. Trying to keep the law, trying to be good enough, trying to keep track of what you've done bad, what you've done good. It's impossible. You'll go crazy trying to keep track of that. You can't. Jesus says, you come to me and let my grace take care of your sin problem, your anger problem, your selfish problem, your addiction problem, your habits, whatever it is. You come to me and you let me give you rest, because he knew that when he was crucified and resurrected, he would satisfy the demands of the law of Moses upon you and every other human being. Come to me. Let me give you rest. Is there a Christian Sabbath? Yeah. I think it's Jesus Christ himself. So how did we come up with Sunday? How did Sunday become the Christian Sabbath, the Christian day of worship? Well, in the New Testament, the early church met on Saturday, the Jewish Sabbath, because the early church was largely comprised, mostly, exclusively, of Jews. So this is when they were already in the habit of meeting and learning about how Jesus fulfilled the law, and that everything in the Old Testament was pointing to Jesus, the prophets, the law, their history, and everything. But as the church expanded, it went away from Israel. It got into Africa. It got up into Europe and Asia. The church increasingly became Gentile or non-Jewish, and Sunday was the day that was accessible and convenient for them, many of them being slaves. Also, of course, Jesus rose from the dead on Sunday, on the first day, and so that kind of became a natural day of worship, and they just kind of borrowed the Sabbath word because Sabbath is connected with worship, and that's how that came to be. Now today we are not under law. There's no Sabbath law that we're commanded to follow, as we've already pointed out. But there are some really good principles of the Sabbath that would be helpful and beneficial for you to consider in your life as you consider your walk with God. Again, these are from Dan Raymond. 2 of these are protective, and 2 of these will add a positive health into your spiritual life and actually your entire life. So the first one is, keeping a Sabbath guards you against materialism. Life is more than money and possessions and stuff. Jesus put it this way in Luke chapter 12, verse 15. He says, life does not consist in the abundance of things. And interestingly, the context of that statement that he made was someone had come to him asking him if he would arbitrate a dispute that the family was having over inheritance. How many times have you seen families blow up over the reading of the will because someone didn't get something that they thought they deserved or had been promised? And Jesus is like, if that's what's hanging you up, you got to realize life is not about that stuff. That's a good lesson for all of us. So keeping a Sabbath is a way of reminding you that life is more than stuff. It guards you from materialism. Now, it's okay to work for your needs. It's okay to work for your wants. That's a biblical principle. Paul said, if a man doesn't work, neither shall he eat. The idea of work goes all the way back to the garden. God created this beautiful garden in Genesis, and he placed man in the garden to tend to the garden. He was over everything. Then remember when he was expelled from the garden, God said, well, now your work's going to be a lot tougher because the world is going to work against you. But work is a creation principle. The danger comes when your work becomes your God or your idol, and it's most important to you. The second thing keeping a Sabbath will do for you is to guard you from workaholism. It guards you from materialism. It guards you from workaholism. And some people, and you know them, and maybe you are one, they are driven, they are obsessed. They have to work. They can't relax. They can't take time for themselves or anybody else. They're just driven to succeed, or driven to produce, or driven to make that next sale, or complete that next project, or hit that next budget. Whatever it is, some people are just driven, and that's just not a healthy way to live. And it doesn't help that we've got technology now that 24/7, you've got your smartphone in your hand all the time. You go out to dinner, you look at families that are sitting there and everyone's on the smartphone. You've got your laptops with you. You can work 24/7 because technology has made it convenient, affordable, and accessible. There's no excuse for you not to produce. The thing is, I think a lot of people derive their identity from their work. They don't know who they are. If I'm not producing, I don't know who I am. And what a Sabbath will do for you is say, hey, you are not your work. You're more than your work. You're created by God. You're loved by God. And he wants to enjoy you. Yes. And he wants you to enjoy him. That a Sabbath can do that for you. I don't think anyone on their deathbed has ever uttered these words: I wish I'd spent more time at the office. No, it's, I wish I'd spent more time with the things that are most important, the people that are most important. My God, who is of supreme importance. Let me ask you a question, and you might need some help from your spouse or your family on this one. But what parts of your life are you missing out on because of work? Harry Chapin wrote the song years ago, Cats in the Cradle. And it was about a dad who missed his son growing up. And guess what? As the kid grew up, now all of a sudden he didn't have time for the dad. And the dad wanted that relationship there. And it caused a lot of men, especially, to rethink their priorities. It was a very good effect, I think, on the American success culture. It's worth thinking about. What parts of life are you missing out on because work is just so important to you? Do you have any social life outside of work? Do you have any friends that you do anything with, any hobbies, any recreational things? Or does work crowd all that out? Do you have more unused vacation days than you could ever possibly use up? Do you have any room for basic church commitments? There's things you would love to do for your local church, but you can't because work just is taking all of your time. It might be time to consider a Sabbath and to consider the relationship between your employment and what's most important in life. It might be time to do a career change. It might be time to step back from some of the responsibilities that you have allowed to be put on your plate. You need a break, and that's okay. Our work should not crowd God out. Even in Exodus 23:12, God is giving part of the Sabbath command, and he says to the people of Israel, even if it's plowing season or harvesting season, you keep my commandment to take a Sabbath. You take a break, even when it's most critical that the job get done. I come first. You need this. Take a break. Is your work crowding out your relationship with God? What are you going to do about it? Is that acceptable to you? Now, what happens if you don't take the Sabbath? What happens if you don't take a break is, you know it, stress, depression, emotional collapse, relational collapse. There's so many negatives connected with our failure to take time to recharge and refresh and renew and re-energize. Do yourself a favor. Think about what a Sabbath might look like in your life. So we said a Sabbath can guard against materialism, a Sabbath can guard against workaholism, but a Sabbath can also help you enjoy God. Yes, enjoy God. I touched on that just a little bit ago. Exodus 31:13, God says, I want you to take a Sabbath so that you can know me. You know God because you take the time for him. Isaiah chapter 58, verse 13, the prophet says that if you keep the Sabbath, you'll be free to enjoy God. That's the Message translation. So the Sabbath builds your relationship with God into something that's enjoyable. God is not some mean ogre up there that's just wanting to pound you down and ruin your life with all sorts of do's and don'ts. He wants to have a relationship with you, but you got to take the time to build that relationship, same as you got to take the time to build a relationship with your wife, your spouse, your significant other, your children, friends. They take time, and God wants to enjoy you, and he wants you to enjoy him. And finally, taking a Sabbath allows you to trust God. It's so easy for us to think that it all depends on us. It all depends on me. If I don't come through, everything's lost. No. Last week we talked about faith. What does faith look like? Trust. 1 Peter 5:7, the apostle says, cast all your cares on God because he cares for you. You're not in this alone. I think of Chick-fil-A. They are not open on Sunday because the founders wanted to make a bold, countercultural, blatant statement to the world about we're building this company to the glory of God. And so they close on Sundays because their religious conviction is that Sunday is a Sabbath and they're going to honor God. I have no problem with that, so long as they don't force that on anybody else. If that's your stand, have at it. But they've cut 1/7 of their revenue, and they're still one of the top best fast food franchises in the United States. And what a gift they give to the employees. Every Sunday, they want their employees to be able to go to church, to be able to worship. I think that's pretty cool. But here's a question. Do you think God is blessing Chick-fil-A because they're keeping the Sabbath, or is God blessing Chick-fil-A Because they're trusting him. My personal opinion is I think God's blessing them because they're trusting him. I think they could close on any day of the week and God would say, yeah, they're doing it for the right reasons. I'm going to honor that. I'm going to bless that. But point being, in the name of Jesus Christ, in the name of the God of the Bible, they are insanely foregoing a huge amount of revenue stream. And they're trusting that God is going to provide anyway. And he has. So I put this question out to my ministers group on Facebook, and I said, have any of you guys got any stories about people who have instituted or begun a Sabbath, and how did it go and what did it look like? And I got a cool response back from a friend named Elliot Blunt. He said, yeah, our family started a couple of weeks ago. It's like having an extra day of the week. It's incredible. He points out John Mark Comer has written a book called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, in which he cites a study that found Seventh-day Adventists, we talked about them earlier, are happier and live roughly 10 years longer than the average American. If you add up the Sabbath days over a lifetime, it amounts to 10 years. So he's saying his family started a Sabbath, and the Seventh-day Adventists, the empirical evidence seems to indicate that taking a Sabbath, again, whether it's Saturday or not, is pretty good for you, not just spiritually, but physically. And then I asked him what did he do on his Sabbath day. This might be of interest to you. He says, we go no media at all from 6 to 6, Thursday to Friday. We only do things that fill us and that are rest and or worship. We play games, we go for walks, we go to the park, we read books, we play music, we pray together, we enjoy as much time together as we can. We end our time around the dinner table and talk about all the things we're thankful for, and we pile as much ice cream as possible on top of a giant fresh-baked skillet cookie. It's our favorite day. Your Sabbath can look completely different, but especially if you got kids and a family, you need to take that time. Allow yourself to take some time and just step away from the responsibilities and the stresses of life and reconnect with your God and reconnect with your family and even reconnect with yourself. Sometimes you can lose yourself. Find your way back and find your identity in Jesus Christ. Max Lucado, in one of his books, said sometimes the most godly thing you can do is take a day off. So my friends, you have my permission. Take some time off. God will bless. And your family will say thank you. And you're just going to be a whole lot happier. Again, thanks for joining us today. My name's Jim Dewar, preaching guy with the Astoria Christian Church, up here in our sitting room, looking out over the beautiful Columbia River, Youngs Bay, Youngs River. Right up there's Lewis and Clark River, where they paddled and camped for a couple of months up here in Astoria, Oregon. We meet Sunday mornings at 10:30, 1151 Harrison Avenue. We're very casual, very informal. We'd love to have you join us if you're in the area. We got a popcorn bar. We've got coffee, all sorts of different flavors and treats and goodies and things like that. So hopefully one of these days, maybe we'll get to meet you. Any questions, comments, I'm easy to get a hold of. Thanks for being with us today, and go take a break.